I welcome you to the second preview for Theological Instructions, which will be Domains Enhanced. This preview will go over alterations on domains, and while a decent portion of it is focus spells, a large portion of what this overhaul will do is give reasons for classes that do not necessarily care about deities to care about them, in what I'll refer to as domain activities, but that'll be addressed far later. Right now, I'd like to give a brief explanation of the focus spell changes for the domains in this book. I'll not go into drastic detail and merely explain a couple of them and how they differ. So the first we will do is Abomination, and that has normally Lift Nature's Call and Fearful Feast. Lift Nature's Call is a fear and stupefy effect around you that can also cause sicken for those who succeed. And the area increases as you level. Fearful Feast has you do a chunk of damage to someone after you fear them. My alternatives are Call Forth Abomination, which is a summon spell, and will introduce a powerful creature as it will take their base level and then apply the elite trait to them, empowering them, but have the downside that when they reduce to 50% HP, they become confused. They enrage to some degree, and it forces you to sustain it over and over as this creature goes on a rampage. I have the creature traits that you are allowed to summon forth be determined up to you and your deity, as there is a wide host of deities that have abominations that each come in different methodologies. The two I'll go over on potential things you could have is Lord of Stolen Blood, could have creatures of the Shadow trait and Undead trait, because they have relations to vampires and things of nocturnal predators. Whereas the Shadow and the Sea could instead have creatures of the Aquatic trait and Aberration. Having two traits helps you assure that even if they have a theming that's not as common, you could find a creature of every level to roughly fit into one of those two traits. There will be some that don't see as much popularity, but for those, perhaps instead that is a world where you take Lift Nature's Call, as this is a alternative option you can take. And instead of the Fearful Feast, I have Monstrous Spree, which causes you to urge up to two creatures to become monstrous and lash out at things around them. It can either work as a simple confuse an enemy to have them wreak havoc upon everyone around them, or for the daring, could act as a mean to apply Quickened on a focus spell, which is quite powerful. And you could even do alterations between these two because you have two targets. If your barbarian is the only melee and you want to ensure that one of the melee enemies just sticks and keeps bashing into your barbarian, you could empower your barbarian and the enemy to force against Monstrous Spree, to have them bash against each other and mindlessly beat into one another, whereas the rest of your team keeps at range out of ever threat for the confused having them be targeted. And this would enable powerful means to lock in melee units that you don't wish to pull further, or perhaps deter spellcasters as they're forced to just end after end do devastating strikes, even against their own allies. And offers a very instill abhorrence and horror to those around you as they see people turn on them, whereas Fearful Feast merely plays on terror and pulling from frightened creatures. This can set in narrative fear and betrayal and abhorrent activities that aren't as successful with other things. Although, obviously, if you're a melee heavy party, the confused condition isn't as beneficial for you, and perhaps that's why you would rather choose Fearful Feast for such a comp, and instead gives you merely options between the two. The next domain I wish to discuss is the Dust domain. Although I will hint that End Times is a very unique spell, and if you want to see a interesting kind of thing, I recommend giving it a read over. And I may even need to answer any questions you might have. You're more than free to put that in comments, reviews on Pathfinder Infinite, or wherever else you might need. But for Dust, we have two simple spells in Parch, Dust Storm, and a bit more options than we have in Abomination for what deity you have. Parch has you siphon water from a creature and give them a penalty to all their checks and DCs, and requires them to either burn 2 actions or to drink some kind of fluid to deal with this. Otherwise, they're severely penalized, which is quite powerful. But another thing Dust could fill in is concepts of mummification, pharaohs, and the intrinsic nature and power of sand that they have in many mythos. So, the consuming sands creates a 15-foot burst, difficult terrain, and it pulls people in, perhaps being like quicksand, as it'll rapidly weaken and enfeeble those within, draining their life from them steadily as they succumb to the sands. And this could be something of great value for you if your DM is exceptionally common in giving people healing potions or something else, where you should assume most people can easily use a consumable rather than merely burning the concentrate trait. Or you don't have a good way to capitalize on this trait in some way or another. And you have a slower team in the way that you do fights, so action denial is not as big. But Dust Storms are next, which has you create an area of dust that obscures vision and works much like the spell Mist, and forces creatures within to hold their breath and can hold things to stop them from suffocating and just slashing to those around it. And once again, creatures water trait or made a liquid get penalized further. Does have the non-lethal trait, so it won't kill, which can be very beneficial if you cast this on an area and your allies find themselves in it. So, whereas they might want to assure that the enemy has worse chance at hitting them, they could find themselves accidentally caught in it while they're downed. And you might want to assure that it won't kill them outright, as could be a very dangerous thing. But the alternative I have is a single target rapid mummification, again going to a more Egyptian and mummy-esque theme as they relate to sand and dust decay as their concepts. If you enwrap the creature, forcing them to make a fortitude save, and has the thing that creatures made of water are penalized a bit further, and it grabs them for duration, allowing you a ranged grab, and as long as they're grabbed, they're suffering persistent damage that rapidly takes them apart, and creatures which die become nothing but dust contained within cloth. Having this be a powerful restriction spell on a single target if that target doesn't have a good method to escape, or merely just to assure off guard for a lot of your attackers, as it'll grab them even on success until the start of your next turn. And that can very much prevent them from encroaching or doing other things. Next one we'll go over is the magic domain, which, unlike the other domains, has really odd spells. Also has way more deities that you could pray for. Has Magic Vessel, and Mystic Beacon. Magic Vessel gives the target bonuses against saves, and when you cast spells using your spell slots, you sustain this and give someone resistance to damage from spells, which is occasionally really powerful if every encounter, like 50% of the enemy, is spellcasters. This is a powerful effect that you could utilize to give a lot of resistance. Mystic Beacon is kind of like a spell shape in how it works. Uh, it has a spell heightened higher than what you actually cast at it, and um, is kind of a cool concept. But depending on what spells you have, might not necessarily be worth a focus point, or might be a like too demanding task on you if you don't build around spell shapes already to be in a easy position to cast your spells. So the things I have are a bit different, and instead go on like um, things we as a community very much associate with magic in some way or another. First is magic shards, which has you conjure a certain number of shards depending on the actions you take. And unlike Force Barrage, has you either send these to allies or enemies, granting temp HP or doing spirit damage. It's a bit smaller than Force Barrage, but works identical to it in every other way, besides that you can shoot your allies with your magic shards and not be hindering them too badly. And the other thing I have is a counterspell, a magical twist, that has you gain the ability to counteract spells or provide people bonuses to their saves and AC against the effects of a spell. If the spell was too low of a level in comparison to you, you can gain control of the spell, casting it as a part of its reaction, possibly letting you have different targets, and could be really impactful on certain spells that don't always get heightened, such as you finding yourself against an opponent who casts third rank haste or something similar, and you're like, alright, magical twist, I'm taking that power for myself. As you would need to be a 6th rank caster, so you would be a significantly higher than that. And it wouldn't necessarily work if they were to upcast the haste and only really lets you beat down on spell rank significantly lower than where you are, but does offer a very impactful changing moment to where some spells aren't always worth heightening to some degree and are still relatively impactful even at their lower ranks, and can work as a really good means to snatch those from people. But those are the main things that I want to discuss as domains. The next thing we'll go over is domain activities. There are some new domains which will be getting deities in a additional, and the domains are hope, which, if you do not know, in my Cleric Enhance and the following things that gain the access to these domain focus spells, I give them all a cantrip. So, as such, these will be getting a cantrip. If you wish to see the cantrips for these, I recommend checking out that product. You can find it easily by siphoning through my things on Pathfinder Infinite. But the domains I have are Hope, kaiju, which is more like monster as a primal concept, because abomination doesn't quite have the same thing. This is the monster domain, that your thing of havoc and whatnot, and not necessarily need to combine domains in order to fulfill it. Purity, which is to fill in for a like lacking any sort of taints, whether it be sickness, poisons, and things like that. Sacrifice, as this is a really big thing a lot of religions tend to dabble into, of someone enduring for another. Strife, which is a relatively aggressive thing in what it gives you access to, and helps you utilize effects in a more aggressive manner than other spells that have these very similar effects. But to continue, we will go on to domain activities. The main basis of this is each player will be allowed to elect a deity that they pray to and follow the edicts and anathema of. If they do, they gain access to the domain activities for the domains of said deity. as long as they uphold the edicts and anathema of the deity, they have access to these more powerful effects, and they can range from things you do in combat, such as become empty or call for aggression, or out of combat, such as City's Sight, that has you gain information and gain a bonus to pursue whatever group you're trying to gain information on. And can vary in a multitude of ways. Almost all of them will be, in some way or another, offering you the ability to use the domain skill of a deity, or the deity's skill for their domain, instead of the normal skill required of you, which will mean that a lot more builds gain access to certain skills if they show up as a domain activity, and can come in various ways. Some things I'm thinking of is for perhaps the travel domain or air to gain the ability to tumble through with their domain skill, which could offer you the ability to tumble through as spellcasters or something else without needing to invest in a strength concept. Because a lot of deity skills happen to have a more mental focus to them and offer very unique ways you can go about doing things. Some introduce brand new mechanics, such as Discover Horror, that has you make a check about a creature, either a particular creature or a group of creatures, and you impose something in a sort of shared building with the DM. You introduce some fear, some primal fear that this creature has, and they gain various effects that can occur from this, causing them to be frightened, and even cause you to be able to have the benefit of the dread rune as you exploit this fear on them that you learn from your deity's insight upon you. It can also come in the form of gaining access to creatures that perhaps you're a ranger, and while you do have your animal companion, you want to call out to your deity of animals and see if they can offer you support in additional animals to help you. And this such would let you do so as long as you obey and listen to your deity's edicts and anathema, making it so vast majority of players will want to get a deity, as is a world where the gods have interactions with the world. Would be really logical that they have a deity that they're prey to, instead of the situation to where only really your clerics and maybe some champions will look into it. Uh, and occasionally an oracle might, an exemplar could, but a fighter doesn't really feel any reason to, even though there's at least some deity that they're definitely to have some affinity to, and could offer as ways to incentivize players on certain standards by being like, all right, party, your binding thing that to make sure the entire party's on the same thing. I want all of you to have a deity of X and X alignment if you want to check through that, or be that they need to share a specific domain. So a lot of the moral agreements could be overlapped in some way or another. And some do introduce effects that exist beforehand but do not exist currently. But I will leave you to browse over everything that is in this preview. For the domain activities, I mainly want to explain the basics of it and how it would work, and that you gain access to all these based off of your deity. So if your deity were to be, let's just put three simple Dust Strife cities, you would gain access to these three things as long as you have them. And if, let's say, your deity skill was diplomacy, you could use Become Empty, Call for Aggression, and City Say, all using diplomacy, and things of that nature. This acts as a good way to incentivize more people to interact with deities, particularly if you want gods to be more prevalent and cared for. I personally think edicts and anathema are really cool concepts to play around with, and having them be things that they want to do and things that people stand against, even beyond gods, is a cool concept to pursue. So, personally, I think it is good to incentivize people to believe in a deity of some kind. And as such, that is the point of this. But that is the main thing for this. As such, the link for this PDF will be in the description. It is also on Pathfinder Infinite. That is where the link will send you. If you have any questions, feel free to bring them in the comments. Until then, it was great going over this with you. And if you have any other questions on theological instructions, feel free to bring them up as I continue to work on this grand project.